Hello everyone, today I want to cover some ground on lubrication part. We talked about the bypass filtration. This is going to kind of tie in with that. The filtration is one half of protecting your engine. The lubrication is the other half. So I want to talk a little bit about the oils. Amsoil has been making a chemically engineered synthetic for, well, since 1972. So we're closing in on close to 50 years of that. There's a difference between synthetics today. I want to cover some ground on that. I have quite a few articles. I have some oil analysis results I want to show you. These articles some of them will be here with this video, some of them will be on my Facebook page or the Google Files. And so we're going to have those available to you. And one of the big things I want to cover here is the differences in the oil. There's actually 5 base stocks they make oil from. The first 3 are derived from crude oil, which is pumped from the ground. And that crude oil gets refined through the refining process. There are impurities that remain in the final product. Those impurities are detrimental to lubrication. So when you're talking about protecting an engine, one of the things you got to look at is the most brutal part of the engine you got to lubricate. And I've got a paper here I'll cover, and this gives you some idea the information about the oils. Your petroleum-based oils are done at about 450 degrees. Once you get over that temperature, you start turning it to a hard carbon. Cold flow on is not good. If you live in places where you have 10, 15, 20 below zero, you want an oil that flows well in the cold. The petroleum-based oils do not flow well in the cold because they contain paraffin wax. Okay, so the Amsoil synthetics, they're chemically engineered, especially the Signature Series Amsoil synthetics. They're made out of a group 4, which is called polyalpha olefins, and group 5s, which are called esters. Now, the group 4s on the high end will handle 550 degrees. On the cold flow, about 60 below zero in our engine oils. And the other half of the Amsoil Signature Series is the esters. Now, the esters will handle on the high end over 700 degrees. On the cold flow, about 45 below zero. Now, inside the engine, the hottest parts that you got to lubricate are going to be your top piston ring and also your exhaust valve guide. Now in this picture here we're showing the temperature for the piston rings, and whether you're talking a 2-stroke, a 4-stroke, a gas or a diesel, combustion temperatures are very similar. The aluminum piston begins to melt at about 1450 degrees, so you got to keep your exhaust gas temperatures under that temperature or you're going to start melting pistons. So the hottest part up here you're looking at is that top piston ring. It's going to run in that 450 to around 550 degree range depending on the load that you're seeing. And it's going to be running that all day long. And your exhaust valve, here's a picture from TRW. The exhaust valve, you're showing up there on top 1300 degrees in that combustion chamber. And down there at the stem, you're looking at close to just a little over 1000 degrees. That leaves a lot of heat still there at that exhaust valve guide, and it has to be lubricated. And then also, if you've got a turbo diesel, you have to lubricate the bearings on the exhaust side of that turbo, and it's going to see that 1100 to 1300 degree hot exhaust gases as well. So you've got to have an oil that will handle the heat. So when I start talking about the heatability of the oil, again, your petroleum-based oil is done at about 450. The chemically engineered synthetics with the esters in, it's over 700 degrees. So I ask people a simple question: which oil do you want around the hottest part of your engine? One that's done at 450 or one that's done at over 700? Now, where that plays in at, I've got an example here from one of my customers. And what I'm holding here, this is a oil cooler. And this was from a semi-tractor. It was a big cam 4 Cummins. It was in a 1991 Freightliner. And what happened with this truck, it was severely overheated. The drivers were hauling corn. It was about a 75-mile one-way trip. And on the way down, there were 2 trucks following each other. One of the trucks in the back, he radioed the guy in front that I'm getting mist on my windshield. And it ain't raining. It was an August day, probably 80, 85 degrees. Guy in front checks his gauges, says everything's all right. Well, they get down to unload, and I don't know what all transpired there, but they ended up heading back after they got unloaded. Now, they called me up when they got back with the truck and told me they wanted to come and take a look at it. So I got there to take a look at it, and they're standing around looking at it, and there's heat shimmering off the engine. I go up to the radiator and put my hand on it, and I can leave it there. The radiator's cool. I said, what happened? So, well, we lost coolant. I said, okay, well, what was it running like when we got back? So, well, it was running fine, but it had about a 2-foot diameter swirl of smoke jetting out of the blow-by tube, and it smelled like burned oil. And the truck had been shut off for about a half an hour. I pulled the dipstick tube out, and I still had some of that smoke coming out of the dipstick tube. So the engine was still running when they got back. The next day, after everything cooled off, we drained the coolant out. And basically what happened, we got about 5 to 6 gallon, 5.5, 6 gallon of coolant out. The thing holds around 10 to 11 gallons. Okay, so they lost basically about half the coolant, top half of the engine. What happened is on the way down, the oil, or the water pump seal started leaking. And it lost all the coolant down to the water pump weep hole. Okay, so on the way back, they ran that engine, basically the top half of it, with very little, if any, coolant around it at all on that 75-mile trip. I got a new oil cooler because when I drained the coolant out, there was oil in the antifreeze. So I got a new cooler, I got a new water pump, new thermostats, we sampled the oil. And once I got that cooler off, I got to looking at it, and this sits on the side of the engine. So if this is the front of the engine, the water pump is right on the front, and then there's an elbow that comes over into this. The coolant goes through these copper tubes, and the oil goes in and out of these passages right here. So it's basically heat exchanger is what it is. And I got to looking at this, and it sits on a slight angle on the engine, kind of like so. Okay, so I got to looking at it, and if you look from about where my fingers add up, you can see there's little balls of solder that float around those copper tubes. Okay, and from my finger down, they didn't. Okay, so I was kind of curious about that. We got hot enough to flow the solder, obviously. And I have an Amsoil dealer that's also a manager for a pipeline company, and they use solder safeties on these big gas turbines and also on the reciprocating gas engines for the natural gas pumping. And those safeties will allow the engine to shut down once you reach a certain temperature, and they have to test them in a test vat. So they have a test vat that'll go digitally from 0 to 1,000 degrees. I was curious as to what point that solder would melt, and so we popped off a ball of that solder with a knife, and it started turning soft at around 530 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so that's how much heat was at this point. Now, how much heat was up at the piston rings, I have no idea. But my whole point in this is they run the engine for about another 5 years. I've got the oil analysis from it. I can show that to you. But they ran that engine about another 5 years, and what ended up taking the engine out was the metallurgy of the cam. Big cam 4 Cummins engines had bad metallurgy in those years, and on the cam lobe that fires the injector, they would start flaking, and that's what ended up happening to this one. We had Amsoil in that engine. It had, I believe, around 30 to 35,000 miles on it. Been in there for 2 years or 2.5 years. So, and on the oil analysis, it shows it's still a 40 weight oil even after the overheat. It didn't shear. So the protection that it offers is phenomenal. That's just one testimony there that I've got. But when it comes to heat and the ability of the oil to handle the heat, most of your petroleum-based oils are maxed out just on regular use. You get into an emergency situation where if you've lost some coolant or you have some type of an overheat, you're beyond the help of the oil. The oil basically in this engine became the coolant, and it saved that engine. Like I said, another 6 years of runtime on it before the cam started flaking on it. So that's a real good testimony. It's a good testimony. I'm just glad it wasn't my vehicle that it happened to. So that talks a little bit about the heat. Now, there's a lot of information out there as far as synthetics. You can go to Napa, you can go to Target, you can go to Walmart, you can buy yourself, or farm store for that matter, and buy yourself something that's labeled as a full synthetic, and you can pick them up for anywhere from $2 up to $5, $6 a quart. Here's what you're getting with there's actually two kinds of synthetics. Let me explain that a little bit first. You have a group 3 synthetic, which is nothing more than a petroleum-based product that is hydrocracked, iso-dewaxed. And those came into being with Castrol in the late 1990s. Now Mobil sued Castrol for the use of the term full synthetic on that product called Castrol Syntec. And I've got an article here I'm going to share with you that explains that, and that's back in the late 90s when that happened. Now what Castrol did is they took their group 2 base stock, they hydrocracked it, iso-dewaxed it. They're trying to modify the impurities that are in that oil so it isn't as detrimental to lubrication. And they did make a better lubricant out of it. But it doesn't perform at the same level as a chemically engineered synthetic group 4, group 5. It has absolutely no impurities in it. Okay, so this is an example right here, and I get this quite a bit. I live in farm area, so I'll talk with farmers and explain what we're doing with oil analysis and bypass filtration and the synthetic oils. We can run significantly longer drain intervals with less wear, longer equipment life. And the chemically engineered synthetics are not cheap to make. I mean, the very best price you're going to get in this is about $9 a quart or $9.50 a quart. So what they say is, well, why should I pay that for it when I can go to Blaine's Farm and Fleet? And this one's one I picked up when it was on sale down there just for this video. It was under $2 a quart. You're not comparing apples to apples here when you do that. You can try and do with a group 3 base stock petroleum derived synthetic what we do with a chemically engineered synthetic, but you're not going to get the same results. So that's something I want to make clear to you on that. There's a difference in the synthetics out there, and most of the companies aren't going to tell you that. There's a lot of marketing hype out there. So that kind of covers the differences in the synthetics. And the other thing I was going to mention, we were talking about the amount of heat that the oil can take. Now, when you expose the upper cylinder area to that heat, especially your top piston rings, you start to form that hard carbon, which eventually what it does, it'll take up the space for the film of oil on that piston ring, which is usually 1 micron or less. And remember, from my previous video, 40 microns is the limit of human vision. Human hair is about 70 to 100 microns. So the oil film on these piston rings is about 1 micron, very thin. When you start building up carbon on them, that carbon takes the place of that oil film. That carbon is abrasive, and it increases the scuffing or wear in the upper cylinder area. But the other thing it does, and I've got 2 different pistons here from 2 different engines, and the top ring is free, but the second ring is stuck, and it's stuck in carbon. The oil ring here still moves. We can move that around. If I can get my fingers on the ring here. But the oiling ring is still, free to move around. That oil ring's job is to take that oil and make a nice film on the sleeve or in the bore that these rings can ride on. Okay, so this ring here is stuck in the bore. It won't move. It's supposed to be moving around like the top one, and it's stuck. Okay, and this one here, basically the same thing. That second ring is rendered basically ineffective because right there is the ring gap, and it's tight in. It can't move. It can't expand out and help it seal. Top one, you can see it's kind of like a spring loaded, and then also the combustion pressure when you're coming up against combustion, or up against compression I should say, is pushing outward on that piston to help it seal on the wall as well. But when that ring is stuck, you've rendered it ineffective. So there's 2 examples of what that hard carbon does. And I've got another one here. This is an intake valve, and you can see the back side of it here is just coated with that hard carbon. So that's going to limit the amount of air that can get by that valve into that engine. Okay, and a lot of that is from the oil from the valve guide, because right here is where that valve is going to go in and out of that valve guide, and lubrication from this. Some of it might be from the fuel as well, but some of it may also be from the valve guide. So the amount of heat that the oil can take is paramount when you get into that hot parts of the engine. And one more example of the carbon. And this is a little string trimmer motor. I believe it was a Toro. And Amsoil's got a synthetic that gets mixed at 100 to 1 and replaces all other premixes. They've had it out for about 30 years. Now they've tested it 300 to 1 at Southwest Research Labs, and it passed all the wear tests at 300 to 1 with flying colors. But from a marketing standpoint, no one would trust it at 300 to 1. So they've marketed it 100 to 1 for the last, it's been, I think it was 74 is when they came out with it. It's been a long time. So if you look at this one, on this side here, this is the intake of the cylinder head. That's where your air-fuel mix comes in. And that's what the port's supposed to look like. On the exhaust side, the port's very similar in size. I'm going to shine a little light down in here, see if you can see it, but it's probably about 80% or better plugged with carbon. Okay, so there's another example. Once you expose that petroleum-based oil to that heat, it forms that carbon. Undoubtedly, this engine probably was making no power, which is probably the main reason it was trashed. Is because it was a dead engine. It just couldn't make any power. It can't breathe. You've taken away its ability to breathe. So that's just another example of that. Now, there's also some myths out there about the synthetics causing seals to leak. And basically what happens there, the oil is the coolant, the lubricant, and the conditioner for those seals. Now what'll happen, and if you look on the side of these pistons a little bit, there's some varnish buildup on them. Okay, that varnish, it gets laid down from the heat. And what ends up happening, especially in the engines and the transmissions, is you can get a buildup of varnish on that seal, on the oil side of that seal. And what happens is it cuts off the cooling, the conditioning, and lubrication for that seal. And what it'll do, that seal is riding on the shaft. It's spring-loaded. There's a little spring back on the back side. So it has to have lubrication in order to keep it pliable and to keep it from wearing into the shaft. So this is one seal that I had replaced, and this gives you a real good idea of what happens. If you look down right through the lip of that seal, you got cracks right on through it. Okay? And it's all the way around the radius on the seal. That's why it leaked. Now, what will happen, the esters, which is the group 5 in the Amsoil synthetics, group 5 esters, they're awesome detergents. They will keep your engine very clean. Now, what happens is if someone switches over to the Amsoil after using petroleum base, and let's say you've got those cracks in there and the varnish has those cracks coated over, okay, and it's halfway sealing those cracks. You put the ester in there and that ester will go to work on those seals and it will eliminate that deposit. Well, you take away that varnish deposit and now you have nothing in those cracks to stop the oil from going through. What it did is it revealed a problem that was coming anyway. The seal was bad. Seals leak because seals are bad or they're worn out. So the oil can get the blame for it, especially, I've heard of that before. The Amsoil will get the blame. You know, I put the Amsoil in and my engine started leaking. Well, your engine leaks because the seals are bad or gaskets are bad. Fix the bad gaskets or fix the seals. It's amazing how many times I've replaced seals that are leaking on petroleum-based lubricated equipment, but nobody ever blames the petroleum-based lubricated equipment. So here's another example. This is a pinion bearing from a semi. Now this one is leaking simply because it wore out. If you look down here in the bottom side, you can see that right there where the spring is at, there's a little spring, you can see it. It's actually worn through the lip, and I'll grab that lip there and you can kind of see right there. I think you can see it. Okay, so that's why that seal leaked. Now this one here's another one that I replaced. And this one's a Teflon lip seal. Now Teflon will handle a tremendous amount of heat. Teflon, I believe, is around 450 degrees is what it'll handle, right in that range. And this Teflon lip seal, this is from a CAT engine. I believe it's a rear main seal. And it runs on a wear ring to keep you from wearing on the crankshaft. So this is the wear ring. So when you replace the seal, you replace both the wear ring and the seal. Now, this seal leaked again because if you look down here, it wore through. So you can blame the oil if you want, but you know, you can look at the grooves on here, it's wearing into that ring, and that's normal. But the main reason the seal leaked was because the seal was worn out. It's just that simple. Okay? So, talking about the esters, one other thing that you got to consider, And most of the time when I switch over to the Amsoil, if you've got a sound engine that's not leaking oil or using much oil, typically we can cut back on the oil consumption. And the reason for that is the esters, if you give them on an automobile about 10,000 miles of runtime, the esters will dissolve that hard carbon around these piston rings, and now you'll have a film of lubricant around those top piston rings that'll handle over 700 degrees. So now instead of the oil turning to a carbon and creating problems in the upper cylinder area by the rings, you have an oil that'll handle the heat and maintain the oil film and protect your engine a whole lot better and give you longer life. That does several things for you. Number one, it allows for less oil consumption, because if this ring is not sealing on oil and it's trying to seal on carbon, or it's stuck in the ring land like this one is, then you're going to get more oil by that ring that's eventually going to migrate into the combustion chamber and be burned, and out the tailpipe it goes. But the other thing is that you got to look at, if these rings aren't sealing properly on oil and they're trying to seal on carbon, or they're stuck, every time that piston fires, there's going to be blow-by that's going to get by the rings, because the rings don't seal 100%. And that blow-by is going to go by the piston, it's going to get into your oil, it's going to dirty you up quicker. So those are some of what happens when you get a buildup of that carbon around those pistons. The other thing is, if you've got an engine that has had dirt ingestion, and you've got scratches in the bore, if you look at this piston, you can see it's got a little bit of scratching on it. That'll happen in the bore, or if it's been overheated, you can also get some scratches in the bore. Now, that hard carbon will halfway seal up those imperfections. And now you put the Amsoil in with the esters, and what will happen is it'll dissolve those hard carbon deposits from around the rings, all the scratches, and now the blow-by goes up, the oil consumption goes up. I've had that happen with one trucker. It was out in California. And this guy didn't know the history of his engine. He used Amsoil in the past. Switched over to Amsoil. After about a month of runtime, he had blow-by, just lots of blow-by. And he was burning oil. I said, "What's the history of your engine?" He said, "I don't know. I bought it with 500 to 600,000 miles on it. It's got 750,000 on it now. I don't know the history of it," he said. I said, "At some point you either had dirt ingestion or an overheat or something that had scratched either the face of the rings or the bore, and it was filled in with the hard carbon." And I said, "What happened is the Amsoil revealed the true upper cylinder condition of your engine." And I said, "If that happens to you, simply go back to your petroleum-based oil and go out to Napa or Target or Walmart and buy yourself some oil additive. STP or Lucas, I affectionately call it Lucas glue, and you'll get your hard carbon deposits back. But eventually you're going to have to deal with the wear in that upper cylinder area." Okay? Typically what I see, and this is what happened with, I had a John Deere tractor, track type Deere, that I put bypass filtration on. They bought the tractor with close to 1,500 hours on it, and that first fall we used it with the Amsoil. I had to get him 3 gallon of oil, makeup oil. Okay, I told him, I said, "I think I know what's happened." I said, "Keep it full of oil." So the next spring, they get the tractor out, they get all done with the spring field work, putting on anhydrous ammonia, all that. Calls me up and says this tractor's back way off on the oil consumption. Okay, the only explanation is it takes on most of those, when you're going by hours, it'll take you about 500-600 hours of run time for the esters to clean up those rings. Once the rings are cleaned up, you now have an oil up there that'll handle the heat instead of turning to a hard carbon, and they're going to seal a whole lot better on oil than they ever will on carbon. And I see this on automobiles, I see it on farm tractors, I see it on semis. So that kind of gives you the positive and negative of the esters. And most of the time, I see it as a positive. Very seldom do I see it as a negative, because if you've got a good solid engine, you're not going to have an issue. So that kind of covers that a little bit. As far as the longevity, the Amsoil here with the gasoline oils, they have run time of up to 25,000 miles or a year. Now on the diesel pickups, we're running typically with the bypass filtration in the 15 to 20,000 mile range. So what it does, it allows you for a much longer run time, less wear, and then we couple up oil analysis with it, and also cutting apart the oil filter to see both ends of the spectrum. The oil analysis will tell you about the small particles of wear in the engine. The oil filter will show you what's going on as far as bigger particles that the oil analysis can't see. So between the oil analysis, the bypass filtration, proper air filtration, and the bypass filter and the Amsoil, you can knock that wear back and extend the life of your equipment significantly. Now, there's a few other articles that I want to cover too. One of them is on warranty, because I get questions about warranty. Now this one here talks about a case from 2015, and there's a Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act out there that I don't know, a lot of people I talked to have never heard of it. And that came into being in the early to mid 70s, and they passed a law. It's a federal law that states that if a company states that in order to maintain their warranties they have to use specific brands of parts or specified service centers, then the parts must be provided for free. Okay, so this is an example from BMW with their Mini Cooper division. They violated the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. They were lying to their consumers about the fact that they could use other parts other than BMW parts and other service centers other than BMW service centers. So this here resulted in each violation. On the back here it says each violation of such an order may result in a civil penalty of up to $16,000. That's per vehicle. So there's a little bit of bite in it for the company. It takes a little bite out of them if they do that. But this is an example of a company that was caught doing it. So I run into this with Caterpillar, John Deere, Bobcat. They tell their customers that they must use their oil, their filters, or the warranty is void. At that point you can say, I'm so glad you said that, because you can hold your hand out and say, now you got to provide it for free, according to the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, because it's a federal law. Just have them put it in writing. They won't do it because they'll end up in court just like BMW did, ended up paying fines. So I see this all the time, and they try to scare you into getting you back to their dealership to sell you their oil, their filters. Don't let them do it to you. And the other thing is, the oil analysis is there to protect you through a warranty issue. It'll tell you if the oil failed or if there's something in the oil that may have caused the failure in the first place. So the oil analysis is your best friend through a warranty issue. So that covers a lot about the oil, and just wanted to kind of give you some idea on that. I'm going to see if there's any other papers here. I don't believe I have anything else. But like I said, I'll have things linked to so you can read them at your leisure, and some of the stuff I'll have on this video as well. But that gives you some idea. If you're interested in the Amsoil, I'm a dealer. I'd be happy to set you up. That's part of the reason I'm on the internet, and your support just helps me do more of these videos. And I just try to help my customers understand why they're doing what they're doing, and just to help them to extend the life of your equipment, because these pickups, especially these diesel pickups, are expensive. But not only that, your own automobile, very expensive. You want to maintain it, and Amsoil is above all the cheapest way to protect your investment, the most logical and reasonable way to protect that investment. So I want to thank you for watching my video. Have a great day. Thank you for watching my video. Be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe to my channel at youtube.com/c/DonsOil. I'd like to introduce you to Amsoil synthetic lubricants. We have the most complete line of synthetic lubricants on the market that offer you greatly reduced wear, extended drain intervals, longer equipment life. You can check that out at my website, donsoil.com. I also have a website for looking up fluid capacities. It's fluidcapacity.com. You can go there and print off the capacity of your engine oil, cooling system, transmission, transfer case, differentials. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/DonSyntheticLubes. Thank you, and have a great day.